All right, hi everyone, welcome. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today for the Wharton Industry Spotlight on Consulting. For today's session, we are going to go over just some high-level information about the Wharton MBA Career Management for those of you that might not be familiar. I'm going to do a quick overview of the industry, talk about some hiring data and recruiting timelines, and then we have a great panel of some young alum at various firms who are here to help share their experiences and talk through why they went into consulting, what they're looking to get out of it, and how Wharton helped them. So with that, I'm going to just kick things off and introduce myself. I'm Robyn Ettinger. I am one of the career advisors here in our office at Wharton at MBA Career Management. As you can see on the slide, I focus on consulting and media, entertainment, and sports, which is how our industry teams are broken down. I'll talk about that in a moment. A little bit about me. I have been working in MBA recruiting for the last 10 years. I've been in a number of different roles, working here at the school, working with employers. I left to go be a recruiter at one of the consulting firms and recruit the Wharton MBAs. And then I've came back and I've been working with the students for the last 4 years. I'm going into my 5th season this year, which is really exciting. And it's great. It's a great industry, really great partners we have on the other side at the firms that we've been working with for a really long time. All right, so let's kick things off with the MBA Career Management Office. So for those of you that aren't familiar with how we work here at Wharton, when you come to Wharton, you have an opportunity to engage in the MBA Career Management Office as much or as little as you'd like to. When we work with students, we help them to explore and refine their career aspirations. And as we're doing this, we're also teaching career management skills. So really, how can you continue to do the job search when you leave Wharton in your future careers? That's part of our role here. And we support the entire search process for whatever it is that you're searching for. And then the other work that we do is more external facing, and we market the Wharton talent externally to brands to continue to build our relationship with certain brands and to build new relationships so that we can always be pushing the message of hire Wharton because we have such great talent here. Okay, so if you should come to Wharton, some of the language that we use here is around the mature and enterprise framework here that we talk about. So just if you're not familiar, just wanted to sort of share some of this really quickly. So when we talk about mature, we're talking about companies that know they need to hire in advance. So if you went to undergrad and any company came to campus and they were looking for summer interns or they were looking to hire for full-time hires, that's mature. They can predict out what their workforce is going to look like and how much need they're going to have. Enterprise is really what I call real world recruiting. So this is where it's more, either self-driven and all about your network and the networking that you're going to do to build up relationships and make connections with people. Or this could also be companies that come to Wharton and say, hey, we want to hire, 1 to 2 students this summer. And that could happen anytime throughout the year, but most likely a little bit later timed because they're just not as advanced in planning out what their business is going to look like and what their hiring needs are going to be. Most students will end up going through both searches while they're here at school, which is a really great opportunity to learn how to do both types of recruiting. And most importantly, the enterprise search, which again is the real world search, which is what you will continue to do throughout the rest of your career. So how do we work with students? So our office is broken up into 2 teams. We have an employer-facing team, which I sit on, which does primarily advising, workshops, presentations, a lot of engagement with students in a lot of different formats to really make sure that the students are ready to go for recruiting. We also partner with our employer team member to do some, company building, relationship management, and then a lot of programming, which you'll hear about later on. And then we also have the employer-facing team, which I formally sat on before. And that team primarily works directly with the company. So helping them with all of their recruiting. If they know they want to come to campus, helping them, strategize to set up for the best success to recruit students here, or to build new relationships with new companies. So if we hear from students that they're really interested in a certain space, we will go out there and make sure that we are promoting Wharton talent and bringing in some of those companies to hire our MBAs. And the way in which the student and employer team works together is we are broken up by industries, which is why I'm here today, because I'm one of the consulting advisors. And I have a partner on the employer side, and we work very closely together throughout the year in all of our engagements with both students and employers. And because consulting is such a big industry here at Wharton, we are lucky enough to have 2 advisors. We're one of the only industries that have 2. So I have a partner who has been here for forever, and she is wonderful. And we work together to support all of the students going through consulting recruiting. Okay, so for those of you that are new to the consulting industry, you might be asking, what is consulting? So let's talk about it. Consulting is an external management company that is brought in from another company to provide advice, whether it's within their strategic plans, whether it's within organizational or operational context. Consulting firms are brought in to help organizations improve their performance. Oftentimes, the consulting firms are brought in to deal with the big, messy problems that the company does not have the internal bandwidth to deal with, or the skills to know how to conquer some of those problems. So why do students go into consulting after their MBA? Oftentimes, you'll hear students talk about this as their finishing school, which means they come to business school for 2 years, they learn all these great skills, then they get to go into the consulting industry where they get to, most often the timeline that students are looking at is around 2 to 3 years, where they get to go and practice those skills and really build up those skills and really build their toolkit, which you'll hear me talk about in a little bit, which is the skills that you'll develop as a consultant. Also, students go into consulting because of the network, because they are such huge companies with such tremendous talent, and that network will continue to stay with you, long after your time there. And the other thing that I often hear from students is that it's a way to explore various industries, because consulting firms work, for the most part, most of the firms work across the board, and some of the firms will hire you into generalist positions, which means you would have the opportunity to work, whether it's a healthcare project, an energy project, or consumer project, you can work across the board there. And so it's oftentimes for students that sort of don't know what they want to do when they grow up. We talk about them kicking the decision down the road a couple of years. They'll go into consulting so they can explore what those different industries look like before they make a decision of which industry to go into. So the firms that come to Wharton to recruit, this is just a sampling of them. You can see here that many of the big firms are listed here. We have about a group of 9 firms that recruit here every year for both internship and full-time. And then the other firms that are on here, they will sometimes come, sometimes they need summer interns, sometimes they're only hiring for full-time. It kind of depends on their need, as well as what the student interest is. But Wharton is a prime focus for students, for consulting firms to get top talent. All of the firms are extremely different. So how do you think about these different firms? These are just some of the ways. I'm not going to go over all of this, but this is just some of the ways in which the consulting firms differ from one another. So as I mentioned, oftentimes consultants are hired into generalist models, which means they can work across the board. Sometimes they're hired into specialist roles or practice areas, depending on the firm need, and also depending on your background and your interest. There can be a mix of work, whether it's strategic or implementation. The firms will differ based on problem-solving philosophies and methods, as well as how much they put into different firm initiatives. Another key aspect to consulting is around staffing. So if you're not familiar with this is where it is project-based work. So you will go from project to project, and the way in which you get staffed can be very different at each firm and can really make a difference in either the type of experiences that you have while you're there, or the type of culture and environment, and whether that's a space that you would thrive in, or do you want somebody who's going to do more staffing for you and kind of direct your career for you, or do you want a space where you can network more and kind of thrive that yourself? That's some of the ways in which they're different from one another. And that really comes down to a different culture and how they think about development. Oftentimes when I'm working with students who have multiple offers, at the end of the day, they'll come back to me and say, these are really similar opportunities. The work they do is quite similar. So how do I think about the differences between them? And we will usually land on the culture. Which culture, which environment is going to set you up for the best success? So when I'm talking about these projects, what am I talking about? Here are just a few samples of how some of the projects that students have done over the past years in different internships. So whether it is recommending a market entry strategy into priority countries for a certain product or company, We had a student analyze the risk and benefits of bringing in cleaning services into a hotel operator, and also designing a health and wellness strategy for an insurance company. These are just very small examples of what some of the consulting projects look like. So how do you think about if consulting is for you? So we really break this down into the different skills and attributes, as well as the lifestyle, which goes back a little bit to how the firms are different. So these skills and attributes that you see here, this is what it takes to thrive as a consultant. So if you are naturally curious, if you naturally like to solve problems, this can be a really exciting career for you. There was an alum a couple of years ago who came back and was telling a story about how she used to walk around the city and see, she would look at like a SoulCycle studio and just make a whole business problem out of it and try to figure out how can they set themselves up for success to monetize? How many bikes do they need? How much do they have to charge per class? How many classes a day do they need to have? How much do they have to pay the instructors, the overhead, all of it. And just really getting into the weeds while she was just walking through the city and thinking about this, naturally curious, intellectually curious about these problems. Analytical rigor is going to be a no-brainer. That is something that is absolutely needed for consulting. In consulting, you also need to be both a detail-oriented person, as I mentioned, that oftentimes consulting firms are brought in to kind of get into the weeds and get through some of the data and the problems that the firm is having, as well as also have that big picture thinking and be able to look at things from a strategic lens. And one of the most important things that I always talk about is around communication and influence. So this is where both, you will have the opportunity in consulting to really develop the skill set of your sort of soft skills, and get to put your skills into practice of how can you read people to influence them, to persuade them into your recommendation, to bring your ideas, recommendations internally and externally. I also think that spending time in consulting also helps you develop the skills to learn how to politically navigate bureaucracies, whether it's internal or external with clients, and those things are really invaluable. The other thing that we talk about when we say, is consulting for you? Because if all of that sounded really exciting, that's great. The thing that also comes with it is the lifestyle and experience. When it comes to consulting, things to think about oftentimes are the brand. What will this brand do for you? Do I need this brand on my resume? Does this help further move my story along? The professional development, the leadership, the teamwork, this is all part of working in consulting, as well as the ambiguity. Consulting can be a very ambiguous space. And so it's something that if you are not comfortable with ambiguity and you are not adaptable, it could be very challenging for you. Also with consulting is a big lifestyle piece around travel. We are coming out of COVID right before we had everybody join the room. The alumni were all talking about what they're hearing from their firms of when they're going to start traveling for business again. What is that going to look like? Every firm is in these discussions. I do think that the future of consulting is going to look a little bit different than it did before. From just, if you're not familiar, oftentimes consulting firms will travel from Monday to Thursday to the client site and work from Fridays from the home office. But we've already started to see that change over the last several years. And I think that COVID is going to accelerate that a little bit more. And what is it that the firms are looking for? If you're interested, if you like everything that I've just shared about what consulting is, how do you get there? What are consulting firms looking for? Basically the inverse of everything I just said. They're looking for experience in, or any of these transferable skills that you have. They are looking for top performers. They're looking for people who have really excelled at whatever it is that they've done. And I'll get into this in a little bit in the data, but they are very open to career switchers. So people who have very, diverse backgrounds are very much welcome in consulting. Consulting is, their whole product is people, and they really encourage diversity of thought and diversity of experience. So there's not one type of person or one type of background that works for consulting, but they are looking to see if you have the skills and attributes that would make you successful there. And as I mentioned, when I said that a lot of students will go into consulting for sort of that 2 to 3 year time period, it's because they're thinking about the exit opportunities of consulting. And there's, and so it's very much a topic of conversation within the consulting recruiting space is sort of, what will this do for me? Both internally, if I wanted to stay in consulting, what does that look like to continue to move up and go and be a partner and then be responsible for bringing in some new business into the firm? Or what does it look like to exit from consulting? And we have seen alumni exit consulting into every single field there is at various levels and different positions. It often depends on what your experience was in consulting, what type of companies you worked for, what kind of projects you did, what your network is that you gained from doing your consulting work, which can help sort of guide your exit opportunities. And we often see people leave around, like I said, the 2 to 3 year mark. They will often wait till they get that manager promotion to start to leave. And it is strategic. It depends on what it is that you're looking for, where you're at with your life. But you want to be strategic about when you exit, because oftentimes in consulting, people will move laterally, and then there's often a pay cut with it, because within consulting, the salaries are such for your lifestyle. Because as I mentioned, it is a big lifestyle job. So you get paid for that. When you're leaving consulting and you're going to something that might have a little bit of a better work-life balance, there is sometimes a salary cut with that. Okay, so what does hiring look like? I'm just gonna check the chat real fast. I know I'm talking kind of fast, so okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, so what does hiring look like here at Wharton? So I'm gonna show you a number of different stats here, but I have a couple of messages that I want to communicate with them. So first of all, if we are talking about Wharton hiring and the consulting industry, what I'm showing you here is that the Wharton MBAs get a very large portion of the market share of consulting offers. So every year we get about 200 plus offers for consulting internships across all different firms. And that typically goes to about 145, 155 students or so. So from that, you can surmise that some students get multiple offers, but for the most part, about 70% of students will get one consulting internship. So why am I talking so much about internship? Because over the last several years, the consulting firms have really looked to build up their full-time pipeline from their internship class. So about 2/3 of the students that leave Wharton to go into consulting got their offer from their internship. And so, as you can see, usually the numbers are very solid for students that intern in consulting who are able to convert those into full-time offers. Now, I will say that has been changing over the last couple of years, because with COVID and the way in which some of the programming has gone, some of the larger firms have actually offered full-time offers when you get your internship offer. So even before you get into the firm and start doing work, you get your full-time offer, which provides a lot of reassurance for students as they're going into their summer. And then as far as full-time, as I mentioned, 2/3 of the class going into consulting come from an internship, but there is still a little bit of full-time recruiting going on. And I will say that is also currently a little bit in flux, because the firms are so busy right now. There is so much business going on in consulting. There is such a huge hiring need. So we're excited to see what this fall brings, because a lot of the students are very excited, or a lot of the firms are very excited to be coming back to recruit for full-time. Sorry about that. Okay, and then who are the consulting firms hiring? As I mentioned before, they are not looking for one type of background. So about 80 to 90% of our students that get consulting offers are career switchers. And one of the things about Wharton, which I'll show you right here, is that because we are such a large global school, all of the firms come to recruit here for their global offices. So all of the US offices will recruit here, as well as their international offices. And some of these numbers that you're seeing kind of depend a little bit on the student interest, as far as what international offices will come here to recruit. There has to be an interest from the students to want to go to those offices. And I also just want to show that most of the firms do sponsor non-US work authorized students to work in the US. And you can see about every year, it's about 25% of the consulting offers in the US go to non-US work authorized students. So what does this experience look like for students? So this here shows the far left navy blue shows the number of students who have applied to at least one consulting firm in their time or for their internship. Red is the number of students who got at least one internship interview from consulting, and then the blue is the offer. So as you can see, there's an ebb and flow here. There is a process, there is a cutoff mark, and this is sort of where consulting has gone over the last several years. There's been a peak of interest, and then as tech has gotten bigger, and as some of the other disruptive industries have sort of popped up and offered very competitive salaries and competitive career paths, some consulting, will take a little bit of a dip of interest there. And as I mentioned, students go from all different types of backgrounds into consulting. So this here is just the current class of interns who are out there interning right now, what their backgrounds are. And you can see there's a wide array of different experiences that students are coming from with all different types of backgrounds that go into consulting for the summer. And lastly, but also very important, is the salary. And so the median salary that you see here for both the internship and the full-time, those offers from the firm are going to be flat across the board in the US. Some of the international offices will make different offers just given market rates and being competitive within different regions. But if you are recruiting for one firm in the US, wherever you go, the offer will be the same within the US. The firms differ a little bit, but you can see there's really not much range here within the consulting salaries. It is it's a pretty comfortable salary, I will say. The Wharton median the last couple of years for full-time, or yes, the full-time salary has been 155, I believe. And consulting is a little bit above that. Consulting is one of the industries that really takes that and bends that median there. So what does this look like? How would you, if you came to school here, how would you recruit? This is just very high level what the recruiting season looks like. You have from the fall semester when you first get here, there's a lot of industry exploration and a lot of learning. So that's going to be a lot of, understanding what the industry is, a lot of member education, a lot of talking to your peers to learn what recruiting or what the consulting industry actually looks like. And one of the unique things about Wharton here is that we do not allow employers of any industry to start recruiting before Q2 starts. So we give you the first, 2 months of school. Students come here, you get to have your time to get settled in Philadelphia, reacclimate as to being an adult student, and start to really learn about the different industries, start to explore what your career path is, do some self-assessment to kind of figure out which directions you want to go. And then during Q2, which is mid to late October, is when we open things up for employers to come and start to network with you. And in consulting, there is a lot of networking that happens through coffee chats and large presentations and dinners and cocktail events and networking events. And all the while that you're doing that, you are also prepping for interviews, because once you get invited to interview, the only thing that matters is how well you do the interview. And for those of you that haven't heard much about consulting before, consulting interviews are primarily case-based. So they will give you a business problem that, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but you're primarily working through that problem with the interviewer out loud so they can hear how you critically think, they can see your analytical skills. And it's almost like taking an entire consulting project and shortening it to 20, 30 minutes. And the other part of consulting interviews is the fit interview, behavioral interviews. So tell me about a time that you exhibited inclusive leadership. Tell me about a time you influenced a leader who disagreed with you. And then very quickly, interviews happen in January. They are very quick. Round 1, round 2, you get your offer, and decisions are due in February. So if you go through the consulting process and you are successful, it will be an intense period, but once it is done, it's done. And for the most part, you have your internship offer or you have an internship and full-time offer. So how do we support you? Well, there are a number of different opportunities between our office and student leaders. So this is just a very small sampling here of some of our rising second-year student leaders within the consulting space this year. I've highlighted 2 of the Consulting Club co-presidents and all of our consulting career fellows. The career fellows are trained by our office. They are interviewed and selected by our office. They are trained on how to review resumes, how to conduct networking conversations, how to do interviews. So they will do a lot of mock interviews with students. And our consulting club leaders work very closely with us in executing a very robust member education program to make sure that all of the students have access to the information and education that they need to be successful in recruiting. So this here is just a sampling of what we did. This was the schedule from last year. We're in the process of making this for this year of what we've called the Classroom to Consultant series. And it is a mixture of alumni panels, prep presentations like this with students on a panel to talk about their experiences, case workshops where students will actually teach how to go through different cases. We bring in external hires, external vendors to come and teach cases as well, and fit interview. And there's a whole slew of programming that goes on from both our office and the club. And lastly, just some of the other resources from our office, advising in a lot of different capacities, as well as we have a number of systems that support your job search and share with you jobs and contacts. And then, as I mentioned, we have student leaders as well that support. Okay, I just spoke for quite some time without necessarily breathing. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break, and I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves. I have a couple of questions for our panelists, and in the meantime, if you have a question for the panel or for myself, please feel free to put it into the chat, and we will take as many questions as we have time for. Okay, so first I'm just going to ask the panel to introduce yourself, your name, what you did before Wharton, what you did over your summer, and what your post-Wharton plans are, or what you've been doing since Wharton. And Braden, I'm going to start with you because I see you on my screen.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Braden. I just graduated this past May. I was a dual degree student with the Lauder Institute, so did my MBA as well as my MA of International Studies. I spent this past summer, the summer in between my 2 years, interning with McKinsey's Denver office. That was virtual because it was in the height of COVID this past summer, so did it mainly from my bedroom in Philadelphia. Since graduating, I actually, something I recommend that everyone do if you're able to, I actually pushed my start date out for consulting as long as possible. So I'll start in January or February of next year. In the meantime, I'm interning with the Food Security Unit at the Development Finance Corporation, which is the United States' development finance institution. And then I'll be doing some traveling as well before getting started in early next year. So I will turn it over to Julie.
Hey, hi everyone. Before Wharton, I worked in communications and marketing, primarily serving clients in the CPG space. At Wharton, I interned at McKinsey, and I have been there for about 2 years now. I focus mainly on marketing and retail. And then Keon.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm Keon. I'm Trinidadian, so I came to Wharton as an international student. Pre-MBA, I was a geophysicist working in oil and gas, and I summered at Bain last summer. And then I came back to Philly, graduated at Wharton this May, and I started at Bain this month, last month. So I've been doing due diligences for the last 2.5 weeks, and it's really exciting. And I'm in the Toronto office, so I also recruited internationally as well. And Steffi.
Yeah, and congratulations on starting. Hi, everyone. I am Steffi. I am also an international. I'm from India. Graduated with Braden and Keon this summer. Prior to Wharton, I worked in the energy industry with a technology company called Schlumberger. And worked in different roles like digital transformation, product development, and operations. Last summer, I interned with Strategy and with a VC fund of funds called Houston Exponential. Really enjoyed doing consulting, solidified my interest, and re-recruited in my second year. I will be joining McKinsey in the San Francisco office in a couple of weeks, and that's where I am this summer.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here with us. So I'm just curious if you can share a little bit about your career journey. What made you want to come to business school, and why consulting? And when did you first start thinking that you might be interested in consulting? Anyone can take that. Sure, thank you.
So as I mentioned, I was working in agencies in New York and decided that I wanted to transition and go to business school because I felt like I had kind of been promoted a lot, but I was going to get stuck and starting to get really specialized. And I didn't think I wanted to do that long term. And I came to Wharton in the back of my mind, thought I always want to do consulting, loved the client service aspect, loved traveling before, loved working kind of with smart people and teams. So I came in thinking that's what I wanted to do. And then having had additional conversations with other students, and especially second years who had just done their internships, encouraged me to apply.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to share their career journey?
I'll go next. So for me, I was working in Trinidad as a scientist in oil and gas, and I kind of realized that that industry was not as stable and continuous as I would like in my long-term career. And I was like, okay, I need to find something that isn't going to crash every few years. And so I actually did my first master's and then applied to the firms, didn't get any responses. And so I was like, okay, so my backup plan was business school. And I know I want to do consulting, and one of the best schools for consulting is Wharton. And so that's why I decided to do my MBA and come to Wharton very particularly, because I wanted the best chances of getting into consulting, and it worked.
I can go next.
Sure.
Very similar to Kian. I come from the energy industry as well. And at some point, I felt like I was literally and figuratively miles deep, but only an inch wide in the world of business. And I wanted to have more meaningful impact, grow as a business leader, develop the acumen, the soft skills, as well as the network, which is why I decided to apply to B-School. In terms of consulting, I think the big draw for me was the fact that I love working in teams. As Robyn mentioned, it's a way for me to think of it as an extension of my MBA experience, or the MBA finishing school, as she said. And finally, I think consulting is a space where they value my experience, and it's a place where I can learn something new as well. So I think that blend was a big draw for me for consulting. And then while thinking about consulting, I think I always knew that I wanted to transition into consulting even before I applied. And this was basically through conversations that I had with people that I respected and people who I saw through that journey. So that's how I decided to do consulting this summer, solidified my interest, and then decided to do it full time.
Yeah, and I'll just say that my journey was actually very similar to Julie's, in the sense that I worked in communications prior to school. So I had worked at a PR agency, was very used to like serving clients and also working with small teams on a variety of different issues. And I think the biggest thing for me is I just wanted to move a little bit more upstream in the decision-making process. I felt that communications was oftentimes an afterthought when it came to the core business issues that we were working on, and I wanted to have a seat at the table, so to say. And so consulting seemed like a natural fit.
Great, thank you. So a lot of questions are coming in, and these are great. I want to take a couple of the questions that we've gotten so far, just to answer some of the tactical, logistical questions. The recruiting process I described and the resources, are they the same for joint programs like healthcare management and law? Yes, everyone who is a Wharton MBA in any dual program does have all of those resources that I just mentioned. Is it possible or common to recruit directly into a specific practice within a consulting firm, such as a healthcare practice? The answer is yes and no. It depends on the firm. Some of the firms, like Oliver Wyman, for example, only comes here to recruit for their life sciences and healthcare practice. Other firms, such as McKinsey, comes here for practice hiring, but not something like a healthcare practice. They come here for corporate risk, or they come here for sales and marketing or digital, McKinsey. So it sort of depends on the firm and the type of practice area that you're necessarily talking about. Does the recruitment process vary for more niche firms like Dahlberg? Yes. And I also got another question about helping to recruit for social impact consulting, which Dahlberg is one of those social impact firms. The answer is a little bit yes, in terms of, there will be some similar skills that you would need to develop for those interview processes, but the recruitment looks different because Dahlberg and those social impact firms are not they're not hiring huge classes like a McKinsey, a BCG that have, 400 MBA interns for the summer. They will have a much smaller class. So therefore their on-campus representation or presence is just going to look different. And the recruiting process is going to be a little bit different, but it would be the same in that you would want to talk to some people, get to know what their experience is at the firm, let them get to know you and your story. And then you would, continue to engage with them until you apply and then interview. Okay. with tech becoming an integral part of most businesses, have you seen consulting firms adapt to this new environment? I think the answer is yes. And absolutely after COVID this year, I mean, the tech is what saved everybody. But they all have, whether it's a digital practice or most of their work is in the digital space. I don't know if any of the panelists want to speak about that, what they've seen from the firms, but absolutely. And if the person who asked that question wants to elaborate, if I'm not answering it correctly, but yes, I mean, a lot of the solutions that consulting firms are working with companies on are tech-based solutions. I don't know if any of the panelists want to chime in at all with any of that. Okay. All right. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask the panelists is about how Wharton supported you and helped you in your consulting recruiting. And one of the questions we got from students was that they've heard that Wharton is a non-consulting business school, that we don't have a strong focus on consulting. And I would tend to disagree with that. One of the stats I didn't share is that consulting is the #1 industry that students go into. For internships, it's typically around anywhere from 15 to 20% of the class, and it's usually either tie or like neck and neck with the tech industry now. It's always an internal battle here on my team of who can have more interns in our industry. And for full-time, consulting is by far and wide the #1 industry, with 25 to 30% of the class going into consulting every year. We are always the top industry. And so the question was, how are the resources available at Wharton to help you with consulting, either to push you towards it or away? So I'll let any of the panelists take some of that.
I guess the biggest thing for me, I leveraged the Wharton Career Fellows, and it ended up being a Wharton Career Fellow as well. I thought that was a great way to talk about people's internship experience and learn how to case. But frankly, the biggest thing for me was coming to Wharton and being around so many smart people in my class and working together to get the internships. I think that's ultimately what helped me land my offers, is because I was practicing casing and going through this prep with really, really bright people who are going to push me to improve.
Yep, I echo that, and I'll say that, like, I think one of the things that people ask, especially when they're considering business school, is they say, like, oh, should I get started on like all this prep or whatever beforehand? And I'll just say that leveraging the resources that Wharton has is extremely valuable, and there's really not much you need to do until you like get to business school. There's like a whole curriculum set up, as Robyn kind of discussed earlier, in terms of like how they prep you for interviews, teach you about the recruiting process, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was really useful to just kind of go through all of that and dive in once I got there. And everything is kind of all laid out. So I found the recruiting process and the prep like extremely helpful in helping me succeed.
I just had one quick thing to add on that there's the practical skills-based preparation that Wharton absolutely knocks out of the park with all the you're going to get people to case with from the consulting club, from pods that you have from the career fellows, and from your affinity groups. But I actually found Robyn to be the most helpful in things that like weren't skills I need to solve for, but mostly around decisions, like what office should I recruit for? And I think sometimes coming in, a lot of people are like, I don't know if you've never lived in the US. And so she helped me create a bit of a framework to decide what was important to me and what I was maximizing for in my MBA experience. And I think that is very invaluable because it helps you focus in very early. So relying on the support staff for also soft things. Also, Robyn helped me make, like, I went to Toronto and there was discrepancy between offers. So help me frame an email for negotiating offers, which is not common at all. And so very helpful in that sense. I remember she emailing me on a Sunday. So rely also on the staff that's there as well.
Great, thank you.
I feel the same way as Kian as well. I think Alyssa and Robyn are always there for you. I think I've emailed both of them at very strange times during the day, and they've always responded. And they've always been so incredibly supportive. And I came in as an international as well, not knowing what kind of industries I wanted to pursue. They were able to point me in the right direction in terms of not just opportunities that make sense for me, but also opportunities that are open for internationals like me. So I think that's the other part that I want to give a huge shout out to as well.
Great, thank you. And we did get a question for the panelists of, are there any classes at Wharton that you found most beneficial for your consulting experience and or extracurricular or leadership opportunities that you took advantage of to help with your consulting career or recruiting?
The firms don't really look for, I think that's a common misconception. It's like the firms don't really look for like classes on your resume before you recruit or anything. I took Management 611, which was like the core, it's some core management class that you take as part of Wharton. You can take it whenever you're 2 years, but I took it the first semester. I would say that like helped a bit because like I had no idea what a framework was before, and that class uses frameworks. And so it was like good to be exposed to that, I guess, before I started recruiting consulting, but I don't think there was anything that was like insanely beneficial. I think more than anything, it was just like the critical thinking skills and kind of like thinking through project assignments and problems that you encounter in almost every single Wharton class that was most helpful to me.
Coming from a non-business background, I would say the entire Wharton core curriculum fully prepared me for recruiting, because I remember I was casing in the summer before business school and didn't know like I think it's the 70 rule or like basic corporate finance things or just accounting tools that I didn't know. And the base curriculum that everyone has to do at Wharton really set me up to succeed in casing, because you understand the basics of business if you're not coming from it.
And then just to follow up on that, there was a question about the flexible curriculum. Did that help in any way for the consulting path? I mean, I know we just heard about the core, but the flexible curriculum.
I love the flexible curriculum, but like I don't necessarily know if it helped me for consulting. I thought that was a great part of my Wharton experience. Like I loved getting to like take I took like a whole bunch of different classes, like barely fulfilled the major because I was interested in a whole bunch of different stuff, and so I liked that aspect of it. But like I said, I don't necessarily know if that was like something that helped me in consulting.
Julie, did you have something to add there, or?
Oh, I was just going to say the same thing. I would say take classes on what you're interested in. Consulting is great because you'll learn and become an expert super quickly as soon as you get in the door. So I would say spend your business school years taking classes that you're excited to learn about, and then know that you'll get trained very well as soon as you step in the door.
Great. Let's go to Keon and Steffi. If you could talk about your experience recruiting as an international student. The question is around the work visa process. Were the job offers you received time limited to how much time you could stay in Canada or US to work? I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I can take a stab at it, and Keon, you can add on if I missed something. And this is based on my experience of working with 3 companies at this point in the US. I'm not saying this is representative to everyone, but essentially, when you have job openings at Wharton, they come up in the career portal, and they're specifically tagged if they're open for internationals or not. So that's how you kind of filter away opportunities that are open for you and that aren't. Once you get the offer, we continue to work on the F1 status. So you're on your OPT. If you have a STEM major, you can continue on your F1 OPT status for 3 years. And depending on the firm that you join, they end up applying for your H-1B in your lottery. And if you make it through the lottery, you get into H-1B. If not, then you continue on your OPT for a couple more years. That being said, even during the summer, as well as when I got my full-time offer, I was specifically told that all companies are extremely supportive. So in case luck is on my side, that's great. But if not, because these firms are present globally, they can support us irrespective of where we are. That's been my personal experience. So there's no, to answer the question, there's no time, there's no ticking clock anywhere. Companies continue to support you.
Yeah, in terms of the Canadian experience, I would say the Canadian immigration system is just so different. And so once you get a job offer, getting the work permit is almost like a given. There's no questions around it. And becoming a permanent resident in Canada, independently of the firms, is pretty straightforward and simple. So you won't have to worry about time frames there. I know one consultant who she had an offer in Chicago and she didn't have OPT and didn't have an H-1B, and the firm had to send her to Toronto. So I definitely have seen firms like they're flexible in that if you can't work in the US, they will find an office, be it Canada or London, that can accommodate you and they'll help you along.
I would just add to that, you know, as an international student, especially these last couple of years, especially during COVID, when things were just a complete mess with embassies being closed and everything, being at one of these large global consulting firms is a very safe place to be. It can be tough. They're very large firms. They have a lot of people that they need to take care of, but they also have offices all around the world. And so there is options for them to be able to help support you. And sticking on the international piece, a question came in of how good is the visa sponsorship for international students at US firms? Other industries have been greatly affected by the administration, immigration policies, and economic downturn. I will say, yes, consulting definitely did feel that for some time. But most of the firms come and recruit and sponsor all students. I will say, I think there are two of the big firms that currently Deloitte does not currently sponsor an Accenture for US offices, but that could change. Things can change, you know, at any point. Strategy and Recruit does sponsor, but certain visas they will sponsor. And so we always just tell students to talk to the recruiter because we cannot message exactly what the firms are doing at every moment. So the best bet is, if you're interested in exploring that firm, is to talk to the recruiter and they can help you through some of those logistics. Okay, I'm just trying to see if there's anything else on the visa international piece while we are on it. Okay, going back to Braden, so you talking about your delay of your full-time offer start date. A question came in of if you could explain pushing that date out, and you know, how common is it considering you have all this extra time to do an internship and travel right now?
So the way it typically works is, like, at least the big firms, the big three firms they have, as you can imagine, right? They have all these recent MBA graduates as well as undergraduate graduates coming in and starting, and they don't want everyone to start all at once, because if everyone started after the school year ended in June, they would just have like way too many people. So they send you a survey sometime the spring of your second year normally, and they ask you when you want to start. So like the way it worked for McKinsey this year is they asked us to rank 3-month periods. So they're like, do you want to start in April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, or defer your start date until 2022? Typically, an early 2022 or early the year after you graduate start date is a possibility. At least it has been historically. It's never, I think, a guarantee. But yeah, so I opted to do that. I kind of was like, oh, I'm going to have, you know, the next 35 years of my life to work. So might as well take some time off and explore kind of what I was, something I might be interested in post consulting, and then take some time, especially given COVID stopped us from traveling quite a bit, take some time to be able to do that. So it's not the norm. I mean, I would say probably like 90% of the consulting 90% of the consulting students start within the same year that they graduate. I think a lot of my friends are starting around like August-ish, I think seems to be like the most popular date, but like there are people like Keon who like started in June, right? So it just depends, but typically, at least historically, it's been an option.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. Another question came in that I do want to address around the competitiveness around consulting recruiting, and seeing that not everybody gets their consulting offer of choice or consulting in general. They might not get a consulting offer. And the person had noted that discouraging but minor failures are good for learning, and they absolutely are. And the question was, do they still get mentored by career fellows and re-recruit? Absolutely. And everybody, we do not turn anyone down. All resources are available. Students will continue to work with us for the entire 2 years that they are here, and they can utilize services like the clubs, the career fellows, all of those resources. And the question was, how does Wharton help their students become whole in their career aspirations if they didn't get their top choice? And I would just say to that, it is a journey. Your 2 years here are a journey. There are a number of students that come back to me after their summer internship or during their summer internship and say, I got it. I got my full-time offer. I came here to get into consulting. I have XYZ firm full-time offer. This is what everybody else wants. This is what I wanted. And I don't know if I want this. I don't know if I'm happy with this. I don't know if this is what I want to do. And that is a discussion that we will have, and we will talk about your risk tolerance and what it is that you're looking to get out of consulting, and where do you want consulting to take you? And could you get there right now? Do you need consulting? Or, was this something that you thought you needed and now you realize you don't? And so to say that you come in with a goal of your top choice for recruiting, that can change. And that does often change throughout the 2 years here. But yes, there is a lot of students that will come back and do re-recruiting. And I don't know, Steffi, if you want to talk about that, because I know you did re-recruiting. I'm not sure if you want to just talk about what that experience was like at all.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. As I said, I recruited in many different cycles. So I did mature recruiting in my first year, got my offer with strategy, and due to COVID, my internship was shortened by a couple of weeks, and I had some time open with nowhere to go to other than my bedroom. So I did a little bit of enterprise recruiting and got an offer with a VC fund of funds. And I think it was a great way for me to work in a large, more structured organization as well as a smaller organization and see how that feels like. But I think the common theme between those two experiences that I enjoyed the most was working together in teams, doing the problem solving and the communication bit. And that's how I realized at the end of my internship that consulting was the right place for me to go as a next step. I had a return offer from strategy and I was more than happy to go there. My team was amazing. The people that I met were incredible, very smart, very capable. I did a really exciting project on developing an operating model for a technology firm. It's just that I wanted to, give myself one more chance. And I reached out to Elisa and Robyn just as I did every other time. And they were as helpful as they were. And I reached out to the consulting club folks, people in my learning team, people who were sponsored consultants, people who had recently recruited, and everybody was there for me to help me do this a second time. But that being said, the good part of having the offer was that there was no pressure this time. I was just kind of doing it for the fun of it, in a way. So that was pretty much it. If there's anything more specific you want me to talk about, I'm happy to do that as well.
No, that's great. Thank you. And it looks like we're just about coming up on time here. So one of the questions that came in to me was, how is the Alumni Network at Wharton? And so I'll just ask the panelists if you have any sort of alumni stories, if you want to share about how alumni supported you through recruiting and or during your time, Julie, that you've been at the firm for now. Would just love to hear any insights on the Alumni Network.
Yeah, I think the Alumni Network is something that drew me to Wharton in the first place. I went to a great undergrad, but didn't necessarily have a strong alumni network. And it's been awesome to see since leaving Wharton. There's an awesome group of Wharton people at McKinsey, and we all kind of stay in touch. And several people from my class were in my start class as well out on the West Coast. It's I found that anytime I reach out to anyone who went to Wharton recently or a long time ago, I always get a good response as well. And while I'm not planning to leave consulting anytime soon, I've already started to set up some coffee chats with Wharton alums just to learn what other options might be out there career-wise as well.
Great, thank you.
I can jump in on that, and it kind of ties to the previous question on recruitment as well. So while I was recruiting, the other thought process that I was going through was if I want to recruit as a generalist or a specialist. And one of the tracks I was looking at was operations, and the career services team put me in touch with a Wharton alum who works currently at McKinsey San Francisco in the operations practice, and he's been a guide and mentor to me since the recruitment time, and now I'm excited to continue the relationship as a colleague as well. So really talks to the alumni aspect as well, which I really appreciate about Wharton.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. Okay, we are just coming up on time, so I want to thank the panelists so much for their time and for being here. I want to thank everybody for coming to join today, and I just wanted to share that the MBA admissions team is available for any questions as we navigate the pre-MBA process. And there's also a number of admissions fellows who have a specialty in consulting, whether they came from the industry or they're going into it, who can also help answer your questions throughout the year. So I will wrap it up with that, and thank you all very much. And hope to see you at Wharton someday soon. Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists.